Hello. We're really glad that you found us.
We are a church family, made up of all sorts of people.
From different backgrounds, who loves Jesus.
Our desire is for people to know Jesus.
To know that they are loved by him.
And to be part of a family who do life together.
With Jesus at the centre.
We meet up every Sunday to worship.
And be family together.
All seeking to demonstrate Jesus' love to others through being
rooted in Christ and growing in love.
Yes, everything for you.
Whether you're familiar with church or not,
you are very welcome at One Christian Centre.
As we celebrate together,
we hope you engage with us
as we make Jesus known.
Right, good morning. Sorry you've got to listen to me for a second time in 2 weeks. You have to blame John Pike for phoning in sick. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. We trust God. Look, we're going to try and keep going with our series today. So I thought we'd have a look at a character I'm not sure we had on the list, actually, and it's Hosea. So have anybody read Hosea recently? No? So for those who maybe have read recently or you've read it in the past, what do you think I'm going to pick out as kind of Hosea's flaw? So if you've not been around church for a while or before, we're looking at Old Testament characters under this kind of title of Flawed but Flourishing. The idea that in spite of who we are, in spite of those character challenges, behavior traits, sins, God still chooses to use us. That juxtaposition of David, the adulterer, versus David, the man after God's own heart. How can those two statements coexist together? So, Hosea, what do you think I'm going to say? Have a little guess. His wife. Ooh, there's a clue. What about his wife? She chose to prostitute herself, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really sound like a character flaw, does it? But there's a bit of an angle here. So where I'm going with this is that, and we'll unpack some of the reasons why in a minute, but Hosea had a difficult marriage. And I say that really sensitively because there's possibly people in the room here today who have experienced what a difficult marriage looks like. And this could be quite painful to reflect on. So I just want to say that and get that out there before we get stuck in. But I think the one thing I feel about Hosea, and we'll look at the reasons why in a minute, but he had a difficult marriage. And there's probably loads of emotions that flow from that, not just the kind of, this is really difficult, my heart is broken, but also maybe embarrassment, maybe a bit of shame as well. It's a difficult story to read, and made more difficult possibly because God designed it. So should we read about that? We're going to sort of dip in and out of Hosea as we go through. So let's start at chapter 1. And we're going to read chapter 1 in its entirety. Then we're going to have a little look at chapter 3. And then we're going to have a look at chapter 11, which for me is the key thing I want to get stuck into. So Hosea 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord. So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I'll put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but by the Lord their God. After she weaned Lo-Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, call him Lo-Ammi, for you're not my people, and I'm not your God. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you're not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So here's the background, right? God's orchestrated this marriage. And he's orchestrated this marriage of difficulty because he wants to illustrate something to his people. Sarah's here today, aren't you, Sarah? And you gave the testimony last week about the passing of your dear mother. And you spoke about that image that we often use between God and his people of the husband and the wife. And you talked about that nightie that had been saved especially, and you dressed her in it, and you picked up on that imagery as you described that story. God's relationship with his people is like a husband to a wife. But sadly, and you've only got to look at your own heart and my heart, that relationship has its ups and downs, and sometimes it's shot through with unfaithfulness. Not on God's side, but on our side. And God asks Hosea to go through this incredibly painful, embarrassing, dramatic story and experience in life to illustrate just how painful our unfaithfulness to God really is. So he marries this lady called Gomer. There's some debate whether she was unfaithful before marriage, she might have been a prostitute before, or it may have followed the marriage, but either ways, the number one characteristic of Gomer was that she was unfaithful. They have 3 children, and the names chosen tell a powerful story of the journey of the people of Israel in terms of that unfaithful relationship to God. So the first one, Jezreel, it means God will scatter. This is the outcome of unfaithfulness, that God scatters his people. This is prior to the Assyrians invading and the children of Israel being carried off captive. And these names that are chosen are used to describe that journey, that painful journey of separation from God. The second one, Lo-Ruhamah, unpitied. And the last one, Lo-Ammi, not my people. If you just read chapter 1 and that was the only part of Hosea, it'd be a depressing outcome. Because in effect, the story so far is you've been unfaithful, and this is the journey that's going to be your experience. And these are the names, the words that are going to characterize it. You're going to look like you're scattered. You're going to look like you're unpitied. And you're no longer my people. Let's read chapter 3. Sounds like we're going to do a lot of reading, but chapter 3 is really short, so don't worry. We will get there. And then I want to talk to you about some specific things that I feel can relate to us. So chapter 3 says this: "The Lord said to me," that's to Hosea, "go show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites. Though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about an omer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, you are to live with me for many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will live with you. For the Israelites will live for many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or idol. Afterwards, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They'll come trembling to the Lord and to his blessings in the last days." Hosea is not just about chapter 1. It's about a whole journey into what the heart of God is like, and a tussle within the divine that's hard to quantify, hard to find human language to describe what that looks like. But it looks like a man who marries a prostitute, someone he's got every right to kind of jettison from his life. But against all the odds and all the equations, he takes her back. This is what God is like. And we've spoken recently, haven't we, about that tussle that is in the heart of God, that tussle between judgment and mercy, and how mercy triumphs over judgment. I think I've described it before as that bias that God has, that delight to show mercy, even though the equation might deliver judgment, deliver a hard stop end. God will find a way to deliver mercy into the situation. Chapter 1, chapter 3, now chapter 11. And chapter 11 is amazing because in written format, we have a window into that tussle that God has. The breaking out of his love in the face of unfaithfulness. So let's read chapter 11, and then we're going to look at 4 little things that I think, for me, give us a hand to hold and that we can relate to. When Israel was a child, I loved him. So this is going right back to the beginning, okay? So if you know anything about the Old Testament, you'll know that this is the start of the calling of the nation. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they didn't realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. I lifted the yoke from their neck and bent down to feed them. Will they not return to Egypt? And will not Assyria rule over them because they refuse to repent? Swords will flash in their cities and destroy the bars of their gates and put an end to their plans. My people are determined to turn from me. Even if they call to the Most High, he will by no means exalt them. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I treat you like Admah? How can I make you like Zeboim? My heart is changed within me. All my compassion is aroused. I will not carry out my fierce anger, nor will I turn and devastate Ephraim. For I am God, and not man, the Holy One among you. I will not come in wrath. They will follow the Lord. He will roar like a lion, and when he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. They will come trembling like birds from Egypt, like doves from Assyria, and I will settle them in their homes, declares the Lord. Let's take a little break from the story for a minute. I want to ask you a question. What do you think, shoot from the hip here, what do you think Bristol's really famous for? Slavery. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, okay. Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Yeah. Wallace and Gromit. Oh, I like that one. Yeah, excellent. Anything else? Chocolate. Yes, I really like that one actually, because living in Keynsham, I still have that lovely thought that Cadbury's was made near here, and sadly not anymore, but there we go. The suspension bridge, yep, Isambard Kingdom Brunel suspension bridge. Anything else? Thatcher's. Oh yeah, Thatcher's, that's good. Let's not get too excited about Thatcher's, sorry. Sorry, firing left, right and centre. Banksy, yes. Yeah. I'm taking Gabby to North Street afterwards for a bit of lunch with Jackson low away for the day, so we're going to have a little bimble round the tobacco factory and look at some of the street art. So Gabby wants to get in photography, so I got my big camera in the boot and we're going to enjoy ourselves afterwards. So yeah, Banksy. Has Banksy got any art down North Street? Not sure whether he has, but there's an awful lot of street art dotted around there. Anything else? Preachers, yes. John Wesley and so on. You've got Wesley Mount just down the road. Anything else? Sea Trade. You still haven't said the one I'm looking for. I can't believe it. Glass. Bristol Blue Glass makes a great present for anybody who's leaving work. Top tip there. Anything else? Tobacco, yet drugs. Oh dear, we're really scraping the barrel here, aren't we? Come on, anything else? Look upwards. Balloons. That's the one I'm after. Balloons. I went to the balloon fiesta this summer. I haven't been for years. And it was great. And you've got the little, we actually managed to stand where they do the smoke signal. You familiar with what I'm talking about here? The smoke signal? So you get green smoke if the wind is favourable, and you get red smoke if it isn't. And everybody's there waiting. Is it going to be green? Is it going to be red? And this year it was green, or at least the evening I went, it was green. And off the balloons went. Absolutely stunning. One of the best things about Bristol, I think, is the balloon fiesta. But it doesn't get the vote of my dog. Because my dog hates balloons, absolutely can't stand them, and she can detect them even from within the house. She can sense when they're about, because when the wind is blowing in a certain direction, as I'm sure is true of most of us in the room, the balloons will sail over our house, put the burners on, and sometimes land in the Keynsham Football Club or further afield. She absolutely hates them. And if one's about, when I'm out running with her in the morning, she will spot it, even if it's the tiniest dot on the horizon. Terrified. So when the balloons are out, she's either hiding under the piano stool, shaking with fear, or she's gone by the stairs, quivering until they're past. The problem is, if you're out walking with her, and she spots a balloon, she will take off. And I was out with Lorena walking one day, and she spotted a balloon. And this was in the early days of her being quite a young puppy. And we didn't realise quite the extent to which she was afraid. And she took off. And she'd run for, I don't know how long. We lost her. And Lorena was only little, so we couldn't really run that fast to try and catch her. And it took us ages to find her. And she was, well, how can I describe it? She'd gone through a wood, she'd come out the other side, she'd gone up a hill, and then off to another field. And we managed to eventually find her, thankfully. But there was a slight worry. But yeah, she took off. And sometimes even now, when I'm out running, she'll take off. And it's a proper workout to try and keep. She's a collie, by the way, in case you don't know. So she can run with the wind. That day she ran off. She needed us to find her. Because she wasn't necessarily where we normally walk. And I'm not sure whether she would have found her way home. She might have done, but she might not have done. But we managed to find her. And I guess for Poppy, the whole point is with the balloons is she's overcome with a completely irrational fear that takes her to a place that she doesn't care where, she doesn't know where, she just needs to be away from those balloons. And for me, the sort of segue across from that imagery is a bit of this story from Hosea, where I read into the story of unfaithfulness the story of a nation, of a people that's completely lost, whose name is now no longer Israel, the children of God, but the name, not my people. It's a tragic story. And it's a tragic story of what being lost really, really looks like. The power of it is that we don't always recognize that we're lost as human beings. And sometimes, even as Christians, we can find ourselves completely and utterly lost. There's a verse in Revelation 3, and I think this is the church of Laodicea that Jesus is speaking to. And he says this: you say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, I don't need anything, but you don't realize that you're wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Sometimes we just don't know it. It's so easy for each of us, myself included, to be walking into this building every single Sunday thinking, it's fine. I'm going to church. I've done my Bible reading. I've said a prayer. I've done communion. When actually the landscape of your life looks like a desert. It doesn't have to stay that way. But to start that journey back, you've got to realize that you're lost. I counsel you, says Jesus, to buy from me gold, refined in the fire so that you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so that you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so that you can see. Look, our lives are so crazy busy, aren't they? Stuff full of work and problems and people and things to do and Facebook feeds to catch up on and everything else, you know. Sometimes life's so crowded, we just don't even see it that we're lost. But Jesus says, let me put some salve on your eyes so that you can see. So first up, we've got to understand that we're lost, just like the nation of Israel that God is speaking to through the book of Hosea. As part of that, we've got to hear his voice. The way that God decided he would get the attention of the people of Israel is to put Hosea through this incredibly painful, embarrassing, humbling situation, a marriage to a woman who was not going to love him and be faithful to him as he would wish or hope. Look, any of us who've entered into marriage, you don't enter into marriage to take a risk to hope that somehow, you know, your partner will walk away from you. No, you enter marriage, you make commitments because you want it to last. That's what the vows are all about. As I said at the beginning, and I say again to try and be sensitive, look, I fully recognize that marriages break down, right? That's part of the broken human world that we live in. We just have to acknowledge that. But we don't go into it wanting or expecting that outcome. But sometimes it happens. But God led Hosea down this road completely upfront with how it was going to work. And God allows it to happen because he wants to get the attention of the nation of Israel. Hosea is a prophet. A prophet is just somebody who basically declares the state of things, draws down on God's word, portrays it to the people, and calls the people back through that way of being, that prophetic way of living and speaking and acting. And what God calls Hosea to do is to live it out in a practical way, to demonstrate to the children of Israel just what their faithfulness looks like. But we've got to listen to that voice. And you've got to try and learn to recognize the ways in which God is speaking to you, the ways in which God is calling you back from your lostness to himself. There's only two voices in this world. Really, when you boil everything down, there are only two voices. One is God's, and the other is the devil's. And you see that played out in the beginning chapters of Genesis. God speaks. He makes everything. God's voice is dominant, it's powerful, it's creative, it's life-giving. And then the other voice, the second voice in this world, comes along and says, did God really say? If you look at everything in your life, you look at all the stuff you're listening to and tapping into, you can trace each back. Either it's from God or it's not. If you actually think about all the films we watch in life, most films are based around the breaking of the Ten Commandments. Sorry to kind of like have a spoiler there, because I really enjoy watching films, right? But generally, films are boring unless they are centered around breaking the Ten Commandments. Whether it's violence or sex. You ever thought about that? The world is full of material and content that is pushing towards us. But fundamentally, it comes from one of two places. There's something to go away and reflect on. But in our lostness, we need to hear his voice. John 10 says this, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. And no one shall snatch them out of my hand. But you may say to me, John, and I may say to you, I'm so lost. I don't think God could ever take me back. I've called myself a Christian. I've been baptized. I've done the whole Sunday thing for years, but I'm lost. I've been unfaithful. And I just don't believe that God would ever have me back. The Bible recognizes that emotion. That's why the story of Hosea is so powerful, and that's why I read chapter 3, because even against the odds, God still wants you back. And we see that because Hosea takes his wife back. And in chapter 11, we have that wonderful window into that tussle within God's heart, where in the end, God's love overwhelms the unfaithfulness of his people. And he makes a way for them to come back. If you recognize today your lostness, if you feel that sense that I am not, even as a Christian, where I should be, God wants you back. You've not wandered too far. You've not been too unfaithful. There's not a kind of bar where you can be unfaithful up to this point and then the moment you cross that threshold, tough luck, you've had it. You've blown it. No. Unfaithfulness is not quantified in that way. God's faithfulness is able to capture you in spite of how far you have drifted. I think we read these verses last week, and they've cropped up a number of times for me recently. But it's those verses from 2 Samuel 14 where it says this: God devises ways so that a banished person may not remain banished from him. However lost you may feel, God will make a way back for you. The proof of that is because Christ died on the cross. And God made the ultimate sacrifice in giving his son so that you could come back. But sometimes that can seem slightly theoretical, and you may feel so shamed and embarrassed by where you are internally in front of God, or maybe it's public, but either ways, you feel the weight of it, and you feel like there's no chance that God would have you back. Well, listen, God will make a way. The Bible promises it. It says in the Psalms that God lifts me out of the miry clay, puts my feet on a rock. God is able to do it. He'll make a way for you, however lost and dark it may feel. I'm sure probably a few people in the room have watched the Narnia films, yeah? If you've watched The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, there's a great scene, isn't there, at the end where I think it's Peter's fighting with the White Witch. And it really looks like all's lost. Aslan's been slain. Peter's fighting. And it looks like the White Witch is going to win. And then suddenly Aslan appears on a rock. And what does he do? For those of you who remember the film. He roars. You've got it. He roars. And listen to what we read in Hosea 11. he will roar like a lion. What does the white witch say when she sees the lion and she hears the roar? Now, this is going to really test you if you remember the film. Do you remember the word she utters? Shall I give it to you? Because I don't think you're going to get it, are you? She says this: impossible. That's what, and Steve, we were at the Southwest Gospel Partnership. By the way, guys, get a date in your diary next year to come to the Southwest Gospel Partnership. A day of fantastic teaching. We spent a day listening to the theme of resurrection. The one word that was used to partner with that theme of resurrection was the word impossible, because the resurrection is impossible, isn't it? Just like it might feel impossible for you to be brought back from your lostness to God. But he's willing to do it. And what I hear from that chapter 11 today is this God, pictured in that story of Aslan versus the white witch, is this: God is roaring for you. I feel that over the church. There are people in this church who need to hear this. You're feeling lost. Maybe you don't even recognize that you're lost, but your God, the God that we believe in, the God that you once loved, is roaring for you. And he wants you back. I love how God works. Friday when I got up, I didn't know I was preaching. And John's ill. What are we going to look at? Let's look at Hosea. Jim, what do you start with? A prayer that talks about returning to God. What's the first song we sing? The Lion and the Lamb. It's just like, God, what are you doing? God, you're speaking. This is what listening for the voice of God looks like. My sheep know my voice. Listen to what chapter 11 says. He will roar like a lion. And when he roars, his children will come trembling. It might feel edgy. It might feel quite nervy coming back. Maybe it feels like Gomer returning to Hosea, embarrassed and ashamed. Not sure what's going to be said to her. But when the lion roars, you will come. And look, the last point I want to bring to you is, in contrast with that lostness, look at what God has prepared for you. I'm going to stick with chapter 11. His children will come trembling from the west. They'll come trembling like the birds from Egypt, like doves from Assyria. What does God do? I'll settle them in their homes, declares the Lord. I love that. What a contrast to being lost. Being lost versus being settled in a home. Psalm 68 says this, that God is a father to the fatherless. A defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. That's Psalm 68, verses 5 to 6, Peggy. Peggy had a word with me the other day. Always use references, John. I've listened to that. I'm trying to remember and be good. This God whose heart we have a window into chapter 11 is looking for you and he's longing for you. And this morning he is roaring for you. And he wants you to return. However impossible that may seem and feel, he wants you to come back to himself. He wants you to come back to that place that's called home. He's gone to prepare a place for you. In John 14 we read about it, and whether that's prophetic in the future or whether it was all about the cross, well, let's not split hairs about it. God is making a place for you to dwell in. A place where you don't need to feel lonely. A place that you can call family, that you can call home. You can forget your unfaithfulness. Come back to the God who is utterly faithful to you, whose mercy will always triumph over judgment. Whilst it might feel today like I am lower me, I'm no longer God's child, God says, come back. And his roar comes out to you today. Jim, have you got one more song in you? I just feel like this isn't one of those days where we just go and have a little coffee and a chat. We're on the cusp here. You can return. As simple as that. You just reach out to God and pray. Just say, God, I want to come back. I don't know how, it feels impossible, but your mercy, I just want to lean into it and clutch it and hold it and allow you to draw me close to yourself and make me know and feel like I'm your child again. Doesn't take 1,000 sorries. Doesn't take a confession box. Just takes a moment. And his mercy is enough for you. Let's sing. Let's stand together and sing. And let's hear the voice of God. Indeed, the roar of God as he seeks us out to draw him back to himself. Thanks, Jim.